Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about government policy and human rights. Welcome back to Policy and Rights here in Depictions Media Radio. I'm your host, Michael Clogs. Return to Al-Shifa, a hospital complex in Gaza. And when people actually returned there, what they found was not what Israel said that they left. So this is from a BBC report on 1 April. Israel forces pulled out of Gaza vast Al-Shifa hospital complex following a surprise raid described by the Israeli government to precise and surgical. In the weeks followed, the Palestinian search teams poured over the burnt out ruins, finding 4 mass graves. They said several hundred bodies have been found. Working with a journalist in Gaza, Yolanda Nu and Rashida Abu Alouf, have heard many Gazans about their experience coming back to Al-Shifa, which they said reeked of death. Israel has said that over 200 terrorists were killed in and around the complex, and that there was not a single civilian casualty from its raid. However, my colleagues have been given strong testimony that there were Palestinian civilians killed in heavy Israeli bombardment, intense shooting in surrounding neighborhoods. The UN Security Council and the US and European Union have called for an independent investigation into possible war crimes. So a lot is happening in Gaza, and we've heard in previous episodes where I've played different clips that were sent to me by a source for just simple people using a cell phone to describe what it was that they're seeing, and in a lot of cases it doesn't match what Israel is saying is happening, nor is it matching what the mass media is actually reporting. Okay, so we're also going to hear about the terrorist, now disbanded terrorist group of Daesh, as the UN has continued to investigate into war crimes and terrorist acts that were committed by this group, and how they may have fled, and the tracking of them so that the members can be brought to justice, as what they did in Iraq was considered to be war atrocities. And the horrible things that they did to people in what they thought was was a move to promote. I don't like to say this. What they thought was the proper Islamic way of doing things, and I quote what they thought was. We're going to hear as on the UN Security Council floor about how the information and the evidence should be shared so that the world will have an archive of what happened and how to track the membership, and also how to prevent such things from happening. There is one specific statement by Sweden where they asked that the death penalty be removed from any type of United Nations proceedings in this matter, because, well, the death penalty just simply put promotes more violence, and the idea is to end violence. We're going to hear also a news briefing from a Secretary General, Undersecretary, as he's stepping away from his job, and he's going to make some points about what he thought his job was and how successful he feels about what is happening today, and the idea of trying to prevent war. And it brings up a question in my mind, the way he put it. Should we be celebrating war heroes, or should we be celebrating those who tried to stop the war from happening to begin with? I say this because there is also going to be a celebration, of course, of D-Day coming up, when Allied forces, of course, stormed Normandy and trying to liberate Europe from the Third Reich. It is a day in a lot of respects that we need to remember, because this is it represents what we can do when we unite for the right reasons. And it's as there aren't very many World War II veterans still alive, those who fought in that war. Recently reported in one of our local newspapers in the Vancouver Sun that one of those veterans died at the age of 100 the day before I'm actually talking about this. So, if you ever have the chance to sit down and talk to someone who's been through war or something like war, one, it isn't easy for them to talk about, and two, it's not glorious, it's not, there's no glamour to it, there's only destruction and pain. And if you do have the opportunity to talk to somebody who's been through an armed conflict, look dead in their eyes, and you'll see the pain that is there. We need to, and this is what was brought up by the Undersecretary, that we need to find ways to end wars and armed conflicts, not ways to promote them. And unfortunately, when we look at the state of what is going on today, that I've reported on, found the report on Al-Shifa, a hospital, a place that was supposed to save lives and promote healing, was destroyed because of acts of a government. We need to do better at preventing this. Okay, so in other areas to think about, I mean, how easy is it to be green in different parts of the world? Um, Here in Canada, it's not always the easiest thing to be the voice of calm in telling people that in order to be green, we need to rethink how we are actually doing things. Um, the people in Europe are voting this week for the bloc parliamentary elections, but unlike 5 years ago when the voice of young Europeans demanded action against climate change, this year the contest takes place amid a growing resistance to green policies. So there is a big question out there: is climate change real, or is it something that was made up by the large corporations? And we have to look closely at that to discover the answers. And while climate change is not the reason for a lot of things that we see, climate change or climate evolution is very real, and it is going to change a lot of how we need to do things. So, with that, why don't we move forward and let's listen to the final press briefing from the Undersecretary at the United Nations.
All right, so thank you so much for joining us today. We're obviously pleased to be joined by Mr. Martin Griffiths, who is here for his last press briefing to you all in New York in his capacity as the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and the Emergency Relief Coordinator. He'll make some opening remarks and then take some questions. So please, Mr. Griffiths.
Thanks very much, Eri. Thank you all for being here. It's been a real privilege of mine to have had... Is this not working? Okay, sorry. I'll start again. Okay. It's a real privilege for me to have been in the job that I will be leaving at the end of June as the head of OCHA, the Humanitarian Undersecretary General in this building, at a time when the world has managed to make us all realize, with your help, how central that service for the people who need us is. So it's been a great privilege, and I shall be leaving with some important pieces of wisdom, I hope, for my future life. It's also been a privilege to be working with you, and I hope also that that will continue in one form or another as we go further. I want to make, the usual 3 or 4 points and then stop. First of all, we're now, I think, looking at around 300 million people around the world needing humanitarian assistance. And we have approached that figure in terms of planning for 2024 with a lot of rigor. We've worked very hard collectively, the humanitarian community, in offices around the world in all the countries where these people live, to make sure that the plans that we put forward are really prioritized, are really about life-saving. We have done this partly because we know that money is more restricted, more limited. We brought the ask down from about $59 billion last year to $49 billion this year. It's a stress-tested set of plans. And as you know, it's based on humanitarian response plans which are in countries or in regions where conflict and indeed climate as a rapidly increasing driver of humanitarian need is present as a problem, as a set of problems. So 300 million people in need. Our plans aim to reach about 188 million of those of the larger figure. We have to date, the middle of the year, received $8 billion. So we have 17% funded of our programs around the world. And I'm constantly coming across, and I have all the figures here, places where, no, we've got 6%, Syria, maybe 15%, Sudan. Halfway through the year, it's never been quite as difficult and as bad as it is now. So that's my first point. My second point is that it's a set of crises which occupies all your attention and all my attention and reduces the bandwidth available for discussion of those crises which are not topping the agenda, topping the news cycles, topping our agenda, topping the agenda of donors and those involved in my community. I started work in OCHA, was immediately sent to Ethiopia. Tigray was the crisis of the day at that time in mid-2021. Tigray, where even now the figures of those who died in that operation are unclear, but are massive. There are estimates of more than 200,000. Tigray was a terrible, terrible time, and we haven't talked about it recently, and yet there is speculation about famine there again. Certainly we have seen a lot of movement back, people displaced, trying to go home, not easy, in a situation of continuing unease and instability. Tigray was taken over in my life and yours by Afghanistan. Taliban walked into power in August and September of 2021, and I remember particularly, as I'm sure you do, that while that was happening, there was a massive earthquake in Haiti which barely made the news, even though it was a horrendous event in our hemisphere. Afghanistan, I was lucky. I went on behalf of the Secretary General to Kabul to greet the new rulers. I had spent a lifetime working in Afghanistan one way or another. And we had some hopes then. We had indeed some written commitments then as to how we would be able to go forward with the Taliban. And those hopes have been dashed. The edicts against women and girls have come one after the other. And the degree to which and the issues upon which the international community engages with the Taliban on behalf of the people of Afghanistan is still a conversation. That was then superseded, of course, by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, February 2023 and 2022, and all that told us about disaster and needs and displacement and trafficking and sexual abuse and crisis and the destruction of systems which have protected people for generations and is not over yet, as we know. And that was then superseded by Gaza and Sudan. And as we speak today, and I'm happy to talk to some of those issues in more detail, the limits of our attention are to these big crises: Gaza, Sudan, Ukraine, whereas Syria, Yemen, Haiti are places still of great suffering. So I leave this job with a sense of work unfulfilled, because the world is a worse place now than when I joined up in 2021. I want to make one or two comments about the world. I have spent much of my life as a mediator, not just as a person involved in the humanitarian world. I have noticed in these last 3 years of being in the humanitarian world how humanitarian diplomacy has been obliged to take a front seat in the absence of much political diplomacy because of the divisions, the geopolitics that we face today. We are proud in the United Nations of the fact that we were able, using humanitarian diplomacy and mediation, to get a deal on the Black Sea Grain Initiative and the Memorandum of Understanding that the UN signed, the Secretary General signed with Rebecca Greenspan in the lead with the Russian Federation on their exports. That was a piece of diplomacy which depended on the fact that enemies could sign up on an agreement, not directly on the same page, but about an agreement, because it was for a greater good beyond it, for global food security. Humanitarian diplomacy is both an opportunity for us to do good for the world, but also, in its ubiquity, is a reminder of the absence of classic political diplomacy. In Sudan, we see the absence still of efforts to stop that conflict. We are desperately worried about El Fasher, 800,000 civilians at risk there. I spoke yesterday to Ramtane Lamamra, the personal envoy of the Secretary General, who is one of the most experienced mediators in the world today, and he has some very, very clear and good plans about how to go forward. So that's, I think, inspiring. I'll leave it to him to describe them. But the humanitarian situation in Sudan has grown worse, and it is a place where two men basically decided that they were going to resolve their differences through fighting, that they were going to take the country down, that we have a situation where highly likely we will have up to 5 million Sudanese people at risk of famine when the next report comes in, which will be in the coming weeks. I don't think we've ever had that kind of number at risk of famine. And this was an avoidable conflict. And that's my double point here. We're not winning on ending conflicts. We hoped for Yemen. I hoped for Yemen. We hoped for Yemen. That's going backwards right now. But it's essentially because the attention and commitment to the use of negotiation and dialogue to end conflict is a trait, a norm, a commitment which is now no longer an essential component in international diplomacy. The impunity that goes with the willingness of men to reach for the gun to resolve their differences has also never been so great. The protection of civilians issue in the Security Council, it was a good resolution, but God knows it's a bad world. God knows it's a bad world. Listen to Tedros on the subject of the deliberate targeting of health institutions in various places. Listen to Philippe Lazzarini on the massive numbers of his colleagues killed and who now faces the possibility of having his organization classified as terrorist. Thank you very much. So we are not resolving conflicts. We are not using dialogue where we had committed ourselves to using dialogue. And the founders of the UN, back in 1945, in those words of the Charter, saving subsequent generations from the scourge of war, we're failing them. Right, left, and center. And the humanitarians, I think, are doing a great job, heroically, in the field, scraping together support where they can. But they're not the saviors. The saviors of this world are people who end wars and build peace. Thank you.
Victims and perpetrators are found. We urge member states to continue using the evidence compiled to prosecute their nationals who joined Daesh and committed international crimes and terrorist acts. Given the critical importance of this work, the United States has been clear that we expect an orderly and deliberate drawdown and liquidation of UNITAD's functions. In that spirit, and per its December 2023 letter to the Security Council, we welcome the government of Iraq's affirmation that it would like to share evidence with all states after UNITAD has shut down operations. Additionally, the United States encourages UNITAD to continue working with the government of Iraq to turn over as much evidence as possible. These efforts must be in accordance with UNITAD's terms of reference and in adherence with witness protection standards and the witness's informed consent. At the same time, we acknowledge that, for various reasons, UNITAD will not be able to turn over all of its evidence to Iraq by September. The United States therefore supports ensuring that all of UNITAD's evidence, whether held by Iraq or the UN, be preserved in an active manner with appropriate analytic capacity so that it remains accessible to law enforcement authorities. Colleagues, as this is the last of our periodic briefings on UNITAD, the United States urges members of this Council to work together to ensure that we can continue our collective efforts to deliver justice for the crimes of Daesh. We stand ready to work with stakeholders to explore all options. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sierra Leone takes this first opportunity to congratulate you and the Republic of Korea on assuming the presidency of the United Nations Security Council. We assure you of our full support. In a similar vein, we commend and congratulate Mozambique on their successful presidency of the Council for the month of May and recognize the important work done. With respect to our meeting, let me also thank Ms. Ana Peyo Llopis, Acting Special Advisor and Head of the Investigative Team, for her comprehensive briefing on the Team's 12th report. I welcome the participation of the Permanent Representation of Iraq in this meeting. As this is our first statement on this agenda item in the Security Council, we wish to emphasize at this point the importance of accountability for atrocity crimes and to end impunity. We therefore express our strong support for the work of the UNITAD team. We are committed to prioritizing accountability efforts throughout our term on the Security Council and commend UNITAD's efforts since its mandate began in 2017. We also take note of the commitment of Iraq to working with UNITAD. Sierra Leone welcomes the positive developments, including steps taken by the government of Iraq to investigate and document crimes by Daesh in Iraq, to hold them accountable, and to ensure justice for the victims and the society at large. We also urge the Iraqi government to continue to implement robust reforms in the security and justice sectors as we look forward to sustained action in adopting appropriate national legislation and regulatory mechanisms to ensure the rule of law now and post-UNITAD. In line with our commitment to international law and accountability, we would like to make the following 3 points. First, we note the assessment provided by the Acting Special Advisor regarding the drawdown and liquidation plans and commend the investigative team for their efforts in documenting and investigating heinous crimes in Iraq over this period. While expressing our support for UNITAD's efforts, we also recognize the potential risks associated with unaddressed mutual assistance requests from third-party national authorities and the significant impact this could have on future investigations and prosecutions of crimes committed by ISIL-Daesh. Addressing these challenges is crucial to ensure that crimes committed by Daesh are prosecuted in accordance with international law and the rule of law. Second, accountability and justice are also crucial for preventing atrocities and establishing documenting crimes by Daesh in Iraq, and urge the Iraqi government to adopt relevant national legislation to ensure adherence to the rule of law post-UNITAD. We are of the firm view that accountability mechanisms such as UNITAD provide a legacy of transparency, trust, and stability, ultimately leading to a more peaceful and prosperous society. The government of Iraq must ensure sustained actions in giving a voice to the victims of Daesh, including women and children who were subjected to horrific sexual violence. Third, we also welcome the review and assessment of the Acting Special Advisor and team. We note that with a proper, orderly, and consistent implementation of this plan, the investigative team will successfully fulfill its mandate by September when the mandate expires. The unified repository of digitized information of evidence gathered by the investigative team of UNITAD is a welcome development. The government of Iraq, interested parties, as well as other member states must have access to this digital repository, guided by established parameters of United Nations policies and best practice and relevant international law, rules and standards regarding the sharing of evidence. In this regard, we commend the team's transparent engagement with the government of Iraq and relevant UN departments and stakeholders, emphasizing the importance of documenting, preserving, and managing both evidentiary and non-evidentiary materials. Storage and preservation of the materials of the investigative team post-UNITAD must be guided by the systems which have been put in place to not only maintain the integrity of the evidence, but to also protect the victims and information providers who so bravely provided the facts and details during the investigation. The investigative team must also provide Iraqi authorities with adequate training in this regard. Mr. President, we emphasize the importance of regional and international cooperation to facilitate progress in Iraq and to also bring perpetrators of various crimes to justice. Long-term initiatives are also needed to promote reconciliation and prevent future violence. We can use UNITAD's effort in Iraq to advocate for future accountability measures in other situations as appropriate. The lessons learned from UNITAD operations in Iraq are crucial as the country transitions from conflict to stability and prosperity. UNITAD has been instrumental in excavating mass graves, collecting and documenting evidence, and holding Daesh members accountable for crimes against various groups in Iraq and neighboring countries. Considering this, the Iraqi government must pursue justice and accountability for historical transgressions, while strengthening legal reforms and judicial infrastructure. The international community, including the UN field team, UNDP, and UN Habitat, should continue to collaborate with Iraqi government on infrastructural and socio-economic development. In closing, Mr. President, the impact of terrorism in Iraq and the neighboring countries has caused significant harm, with women and children bearing the brunt of the suffering. Nevertheless, Iraqis must look ahead and maintain their unwavering commitment to building a safe, secure, and stable nation. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Mr. President, I would like to first of all congratulate Mozambique for their successful presidency last month and assure you, President, of the full support of Switzerland for your mandate in June. I would like to welcome Ana Pero Lopez, the new Special Advisor, and wish her success in this crucial period. And I also welcome the participation of the representative of Iraq. I would like to make two main observations. First, justice for the victims of Daesh crimes must remain a common priority. While we welcome the ongoing efforts to implement the roadmap for an orderly conclusion of UNITAD's mandate, we expect Iraq, as well as all other states concerned, to continue ensuring that all crimes committed by Daesh are prosecuted in accordance with international law. The end of UNITAD's mandate must not lead to impunity for the perpetrators of these crimes. Switzerland, therefore, continues to support the work of the investigative team and the work of an impartial justice system committed to ensuring justice for the victims and the protection of their rights. UNITAD has also engaged with Iraqi civil society and succeeded in establishing a much-needed dialogue. The loss of this point of contact at the end of the mission is regrettable. Second, the management of evidence and the preservation of UNITAD's legacy are essential. In view of the many legal proceedings that will not be completed before the end of UNITAD's mandate, we must ensure that its work is preserved and that the evidence collected remains accessible. Switzerland therefore welcomes the exchange between UNITAD and the UN Archives and Records Management Section aimed at establishing a current archive system. Such an innovative solution would ensure permanent access to the evidence held by the investigation team in order to continue holding accountable the perpetrators of the crimes committed by Daesh on a global scale. In this respect, access to evidence must be granted in accordance with United Nations policies and best practices. We therefore reiterate our opposition to the sharing of evidence in judicial proceedings that could lead to the death penalty. Also, because of its incompatibility with respect for human dignity and human rights, Switzerland is opposed to capital punishment under all circumstances. Mr. President, as demonstrated by the numerous requests for assistance from Member States, UNITAD's contribution to accountability efforts is crucial. The team's work with survivors, families, and affected communities must also be highlighted. Their stories, like the memory of the victims who perished, must not be forgotten. We therefore support continued cooperation between Iraq and UNITAD in this final phase in order to find lasting solutions to ensure that the crimes committed by Daesh continue to be prosecuted in Iraq and elsewhere. I thank you.
I thank the representatives of Switzerland for their statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as representative of the Republic of Korea. Allow me first to thank the Acting Special Envoy for her briefing and welcome the representative of Iraq in the chamber. We are all unified in agreeing that Daesh perpetrators must be held criminally accountable for their heinous crimes in Iraq and other states. With a shared commitment to pursue justice and accountability, we adopted Resolution 2379 at the request of the Iraqi government. The ROK commends UNITAD's tireless pursuit of evidence-based justice that establishes the truth and fulfills the requests of victims in Iraq. To preserve the legacy of UNITAD, which has commendably paved the foundation of accountability for the crimes of Daesh, both in Iraq and around the world, I would like to emphasize the following 3 points. First, we reiterate the importance of collaboration between Iraq and UNITAD. This includes helping to build the capacity of the Iraqi judiciary system in the areas of witness protection, digital forensics, and mass grave excavations. As such, the Republic of Korea calls for tailored initiatives beyond the closing of UNITAD by UN system entities to help the Iraq authorities in their fight to combat terrorism moving forward. Second, the uninterrupted chain of sharing and storing UNITAD evidence is of high importance to ensure continued accountability. In particular, access to UNITAD's archives by other states is integral in pursuing criminal accountability for Daesh crimes worldwide. Daesh cannot rely on impunity by fleeing abroad. The Republic of Korea echoes the calls of other members to establish a system to share the UNITAD archives in litigation in states other than Iraq, based on consultations with the Iraqi government. Third, the ROK welcomes UNITAD's focus on sexual and gender-based crimes and crimes against children committed by Daesh. As a proud signatory of the shared commitments on WPS, the Republic of Korea supports the importance of protecting women in armed conflict and enhancing their key roles and participation in all stages of peace processes. After the conclusion of UNITAD, we call on the Iraqi government to continue UNITAD's efforts not only to punish the perpetrators of sexual violence in conflict, but also to end the culture of impunity of gender-based violence. The depth, breadth, and speed of the work the UNITAD has undertaken for the last 6 years has been a source of global optimism for our common pursuit of justice against terrorism. Yet our quest for justice against Daesh does not stop in September. Daesh remains and is still committing crimes and spreading terror. UNITAD's legacy must send a clear message to them: your reign of impunity is over. The Republic of Korea stands firmly with the government of Iraq and Iraqi people to deliver justice for Daesh atrocities. Now I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the representative of Iraq.
I thank you, Mr. President. Allow me to deliver my speech in Arabic.
I begin by expressing our congratulations to the Republic of Korea on its assumption of the presidency of the Security Council for the current month, and I wish your esteemed delegation success in your efforts. I would also like to congratulate the delegation of Mozambique for their successful stewardship of the Security Council last month. I express the appreciation of the Iraqi government, of the United Nations efforts, its main organs, and its main offices through its resolutions, its recommendations and decisions. We also appreciate all the international efforts that have been made to support Iraq in its war against terrorism and its pursuit of terrorists, taking into consideration Iraq's request on drawing down UNITAD's work so that its work could be completed at the national level. And since this is the first briefing to be offered by the team's new leadership, I thank Ms. Ana Piero Lopez and her team for the intensive and significant efforts that they've made during this short period of time. And we hope that they would be able to continue this work and their coordination with the National Coordinating Committee to arrive at the appropriate solutions to what remains in terms of retaining, custody, preserving, and storing evidence in Iraq as stipulated by Security Council Resolution 2697. Mr. President, we welcome what the 12th report of the UNITAD contained and what was presented by Ms. Piero Lopez, the Acting Special Advisor and head of the investigative team, in her briefing in accordance with Security Council Resolution 2697 of the year 2023. We welcome the activities that have been taken within the context of UNITAD's drawdown and liquidation. The report contains several important points that reflected the serious nature pursued in implementing the requirements of liquidation and drawdown within the set deadlines. It outlined the progress made in the team's work and the phases it has completed in Iraq through participation and coordination with the government of Iraq. It noted the accountability that has been achieved in cooperation with national authorities, as well as capacity building and training offered to the national Iraqi team so that it can take over UNITAD's functions and legacy once the drawdown is complete. The Iraqi government's position on terrorism has and always been in taking the necessary measures to eliminate this dangerous scourge. My government is working on building our national capacity in counterterrorism, and we are working on bolstering our judicial system in a manner that is in harmony with the principles of human rights and in full respect of Iraq's international obligations and as stipulated by the Iraqi constitution. We have made the necessary legal preparations for the use of the evidence once handed over to Iraq from UNITAD to be used by national courts. We continue to bolster our legal and national and judicial capacities. And in that vein, the Iraqi House of Representatives has completed the first reading of a bill establishing an Iraqi national court to consider Daesh's crimes to prepare for its legislation. This bill will use evidence in Iraqi courts to consider crimes perpetrated by Daesh, which can be classified as international crimes against Iraqi citizens. A lot of the above. And before drawdown is completed, we stress the need for the Iraqi authorities to receive the conclusions of UNITAD's investigations and evidence collected in Iraq over the past period, in accordance with paragraph 39 of the Terms of Reference. This paragraph tasks UNITAD, in accordance with its mandate, with the provision of appropriate legal assistance and capacity building to the government of Iraq in order to strengthen its courts and judicial systems, because the Iraqi people are the main victims of the crimes of Daesh in Iraq. This would be an incentive to continue to uncover more evidence of the other crimes committed by this terrorist organization. It will be an incentive to move forward in taking the necessary steps to preserve and store evidence in Iraq. Here we know that the government of Iraq is the party that represents victims and their families and has undertaken to the task of achieving redress for the victims and upholding justice for them. And the main role here is accorded to the specialized Iraqi authorities, which continue to exert great efforts to achieve accountability and through parallel tracks to achieve justice and redress and offer support to survivors, including victims and their families. Iraq will spare no effort, no matter how long it takes, and no matter the delays. It will spare no effort until justice and accountability are achieved to those whose hands are covered in the blood of Iraqis and for all the crimes that have been perpetrated by Daesh. Just as Iraqis defeated and uprooted Daesh, it will be Iraqis who will achieve accountability and justice for the crimes they have perpetrated, in accordance with fair and just legal national procedures that are in line with Iraq's legislative jurisprudence. Mr. President, the government of Iraq reiterates its desire and readiness to share evidence with all countries once UNITAD draws down its operations in Iraq by the end of 2024. This includes evidence owned by Iraq and handed over to the UNITAD, and the evidence that was produced and developed by the team, and which will ultimately be returned to the government of Iraq in accordance with the team's mandate. This emanates from Iraq's firm position to uphold accountability at the national level and to assist other countries in achieving this accountability as well. We support the continuation of collective international efforts to pursue those involved in Daesh's terrorist crimes and those who support and fund them in pursuit of the maintenance of international peace and security and confronting threats to national and global security, and in accordance with the national measures of countries, because it is important to deprive the terrorists who managed to flee Iraq from any safe havens. The government of Iraq reiterates its commitment to cooperating with the international investigative team and to offering it all means of support through the designated National Coordinating Committee so that it can go ahead with its drawdown, liquidation, and withdrawal measures with full respect for Iraq's sovereignty and legal jurisdiction over crimes perpetrated on its territory and against its people. We'd like to clarify here that Iraq will review the evidence that has been recently handed over by the team. And at the same time, we understand that the new leadership of the team has much on its plate that it must complete within the drawdown and liquidation phase. Therefore, we urge the team leader to continue her efforts in handing over custody of these evidence to Iraq as soon as possible and to put in place mechanisms for the preservation and storage of said evidence in Iraq. We stress that cooperation between Iraq and the team is governed by the terms of reference, seeing as Iraq is the main recipient of evidence as well as any materials and analyses produced by the investigative team. In closing, allow me, Mr. President, to express our thanks and gratitude to you and to the members of the Security Council and to all friendly states that have offered positive support to my country as we confronted terrorism and as we sought to ensure the success of UNITAD. We thank you for the support given to Iraq in its efforts to hold accountable those who perpetrated crimes in Iraq within the context of the terrorist Daesh group. I would also like to salute former special advisors of UNITAD, Mr. Karim Khan and Mr. Christian Richard, who led UNITAD in the past, and we thank them for the efforts that they have made during their service to Iraq. I thank you, sir.
Okay, final thoughts. And thank you for listening to Palestinian Rights here on Depictions Media Radio. And what can we do ourselves? What is the one step? And I want to inspire people to actually do things that will end the hatred. Violence comes out of fear, and fear a lot of times comes out of hatred or misunderstanding. Misunderstanding is easy if we open our hearts to simply trying to understand our fellow brothers and sister human beings. Hatred becomes when we decide not to try to understand our brothers and sisters in humanity, and we decide because they are different from us that we need to push them aside, limit them, or even kill them off. We need to end the hatred and open our hearts to understanding. A lot of armed conflicts could be simply solved by sitting down at a table and understanding and negotiating all the needs that the people at hand need. Instead of trying to control people, that we need to try to understand each other. And that is the kind of world that we need to be building and moving forward with. Please find that subscribe button wherever it is, and if you have the chance to support us and help us grow, please find that support button wherever it may be also. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.